Hi, Greg Whitmore, Tiny Mountain Wellness. Thanks for joining me today. Did you know Tiny Mountain Wellness is the 5th ranked health and wellness channel on YouTube and the internet? And neither did I. Actually, I just made that up, but that's where I want to get to. But I can only do it in 2 ways. One is I have to put out great content that you love. And secondly, I need you to like it and share it and tell your friends about it. And maybe one day I will get up to number 5. But right now, let's get back to the part where we're creating great content. Today, the topic is Nutrition 102. My last video was Nutrition 101. I'll put a link to it in the description below. That talked about the very fundamentals and intro to nutrition. We're going to take it a little step further and talk about some carbohydrates, a little bit more about the nutrients. But as you recall, in our last video, we did talk about the nutrients and macro versus micronutrients, those macronutrients that contain calories, the carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. We also talked about which ones do we need and do we have to get from food, the essential ones. We talked about how over 28 years I've been teaching nutrition wrong. I've been inaccurate, and a lot of that's because of the way I was taught and the information that's on the internet and the information I use to put curriculum together, and that's been wrong. So there's a new way of thinking, and we're slowly having a paradigm shift, but we need to get that shifted and teach it the right way. A lot of that wrong teaching is based on the history of nutrition education and the food guide pyramid and how the foundation was grains and carbohydrates, and we know that that's not really the way it should be. We also talked about nutrition myths and how breakfast isn't necessarily the most important meal of the day, or certainly it doesn't have to be in the morning. Now, I will always refer back to Whitmore's Big Five. Remember, those are the 5 things that I think really lead us to disease and poor health and becoming sick. Poor nutrition, too much stress, lack of exercise, lack of sleep, and then poor decisions and risky behaviors. And again, in the last video, I wanted to spin that in a positive way and fight those things. And so we need to have proper nutrition. We start with health educators and teaching proper nutrition. Ways to cope with stress, which I'll get to in future videos, and certainly designing exercise programs that fit us best. Improving our sleep is always important. Remember, that's 1/3 of our life. We need to have good sleep patterns, and we always have to make great decisions, including decisions on what we eat. So what are we going to do today? Today we're going to talk about the types of carbohydrates. We're going to delve more into that macronutrient. We're going to talk about the best sources of carbohydrates. And we're going to talk about which carbohydrates to avoid. We're probably not going to avoid carbohydrates completely, right? So let's talk about which ones we should avoid and which ones are best sources. And then we're going to start shifting our way of thinking, and we're going to teach you why fat should become our main source of energy. But it takes a little training of our body. Going back again, a little review. It's the health teacher in me. Let's talk about the nutrients. Remember, we listed those 6 nutrients: carbohydrates, fats, proteins, vitamins, minerals, and water. We talked about the 3 that contain calories. They have energy. They're our macronutrients. We talked about the 2 really important micronutrients that we don't need in very large quantities, and they don't contain any energy or calories, but they're vital to our body processes. And water, we talked about how we almost can't get enough water, and we're probably not getting near enough based on how much water is in our body and makes up every part of our cell. We discussed the 5 essential nutrients. Remember, the essential means we need them, and our body doesn't make them. So where do we have to get them? We have to get them from food sources. Fat in the form of essential fatty acids, protein, essential amino acids, vitamins and minerals we need to get from the food we eat, and certainly water. We need to consume a lot of water. The one that wasn't essential, remember, was carbohydrates. We don't have to have carbohydrates, and that's mainly because our body can make its own. Remember that process we talked about, gluconeogenesis. Gluco meaning sugar, neo is new, and genesis means to form. So remember, our liver and our kidney and a little bit in our intestines can make glucose, can make carbohydrates, so it's not essential. We do not need to consume carbs, as you recall. It's not essential, and yet, as we discussed, we do, and we eat a lot of carbohydrates, a lot of processed sugar, and it's leading to poor health, obesity, type 2 diabetes, and so forth. So let's now turn to the energy and macronutrients. Carbohydrates, fats, proteins all have energy, okay? And energy is measured in calories. Now, as we go along in my discussions and my teachings about nutrition, I'm going to try to get you away from counting calories. We are too hung up on counting calories. Every nutrition label we have, that's the biggest, boldest number we see, and that's calories. And while there's some good uses for it, calories don't tell the tale as far as how healthy a product is. Again, I'm going to teach you how to read nutrition labels and teach you how to look at the ingredients and the percentages of the macronutrients, not just focus on calories. But in the end, that's how we measure the energy in food. Looking at carbohydrates, they have 4 calories in every gram, okay? And this is the body's preferred source, and we'll talk about why the body loves to use carbohydrates for energy. Protein, again, has 4 calories in every gram. Body doesn't like to use protein. It will if it has to, but we don't want protein to be our source of energy because that's in our muscles. That's what we use to repair tissues and organs and that sort of thing. So we don't want our energy really to come from protein. Looking at fat, it has 9 calories in every gram. So it's obvious it has more than double the amount of energy per gram than carbohydrates and protein. And yet the body really doesn't like to use fat. It stores fat for future use. It likes to use carbohydrates. So we'll talk about how we can train our body to use fat because it's more than double the energy source as carbohydrates. So let's turn back to carbohydrates and let's talk about the 2 types of carbohydrates. We know we're going to take some carbohydrates in even though we don't need to, and by taking too many in it's causing us to be unhealthy, but we're going to take some carbohydrates in. The first type of carbohydrates we'll talk about are simple carbohydrates. They're called simple because the molecule, molecularly speaking, they are simple and they're very easy for our body to break down. That's one reason they're a preferred source for our body. These simple carbohydrates are sugars that are found naturally in fruits and milk. And they're found in a lot of the processed foods and refined foods, the table sugar, the syrups, and certainly all the candy and soft drinks, chips, cookies, those sort of things. Pack in a ton of simple carbohydrates. And that's probably our downfall. So focusing again on those simple carbohydrates, we think about the table sugar and that stuff that we add to our coffee or we add on top of our oatmeal or cereal. Sugar cubes, of course, but sometimes we don't think about the fruit juices. The apple juice, the orange juice that we drink contains a lot of simple carbohydrates. Milk, okay, sugar is naturally found in the form of lactose in milk, so maybe we have to rethink how much milk we drink. A lot of the food we eat, of course, bagels, or and you see this as typical breakfast items, but we'll talk about bread and certainly white bread as a source of simple carbohydrates. And all fruit really is a simple carbohydrate, and we'll talk about how fruit's not bad for you certainly, but there are better fruits than others, especially if we're suffering from diabetes or weight gain and that sort of thing. Other simple carbohydrates found all around us, the breads, certainly white bread especially, the pastas. These are 2 major weaknesses for me. I love breads, I love pasta. Rice is another favorite of mine. Tacos, soft shell, hard shell, tortillas, all those things. Pancakes, waffles, syrup, jellies, jams, all those are great sources, or abundant sources I should say, of simple carbohydrates. And of course one of the problems we're facing, especially our teenagers, but even our young and older adults, all these things have really caused that weight gain and a lot of the disease, the soda, the processed cookies and the candy bars, and we're in a Starbucks generation now where everything's a huge 20-ounce, 32-ounce drink full of whipped cream and chocolate and coffee and Gatorade, chips. So how do we spot sugar? Certainly if we're looking at a label, you might not, it won't say just sugar often, but words that contain the suffix OSE, that tells us that's a sugar. Glucose being the one that we'll probably talk about the most, that's the sugar that's in our blood. And every carbohydrate really is broken down into the simplest form, and that's glucose. And certainly diabetics are well versed in checking their blood sugar, and they have a glucometer that they have to test their blood sugar often. But as we'll talk about later, we have too much blood sugar often. Fructose, the sugar in fruit, and fructose can be pretty damaging, and probably of all the sugars, as we'll talk about, especially some of the processed fructose, can be pretty bad for us. Lactose, again in milk, maltose, even grains contain some sugar. Sucrose, when you put glucose and fructose together, get that table sugar. We use a lot of table sugar. We go through a ton of sugar in our society. And if I could have you do one thing for me today when you're done with this video, look at some of the nutrition labels from the foods you eat, and if it contains high fructose corn syrup, please take that out of your diet. Guarantee you that's one way that you can make yourself healthier. So the first type was simple. Now we're going to talk about complex carbohydrates. And when we talk about complex, we mean, again, molecularly speaking, it's a more complex molecule, which means it's going to take the body longer to break down. And that's a good thing. Form of starches, a lot of these foods have starches, and fiber. We'll talk more about fiber, how it's important in our diet. It doesn't contain any calories or any nutritional value, but we need that in our diet, and they're often in complex carbohydrates. Found in whole grain food, it's important that we take in whole grain food, and they satisfy our appetite, so we don't eat as much. That's a good thing about complex carbohydrates. So when we talk about complex carbohydrates, what are we talking about? We're talking about whole grain products. Now, we'll discuss whole grain versus refined a little bit more in another video, but we need to have as much of our carbohydrates come in the form of whole grains. And remember, we'll take wheat for instance. When the wheat goes to the mill, it's stripped of a lot of its parts. Sometimes it's bleached. Sometimes they add preservatives. They enrich it with some more vitamins and minerals. So it's a processed product now. It's no longer whole. And that makes it less nutritional value. It may stay on the shelf longer and it may be less expensive, but it is not better for us. Certainly bread is the best example. Whole wheat bread is certainly better than white bread. Granola, beans and nuts and different things, lentils, we'll talk about that, are good sources of complex carbohydrates. Fruits and vegetables, good sources. And yams, sweet potatoes are certainly better than potatoes. So we want to eat as many complex carbohydrates, but again, we need to limit it to some extent in our overall diet. So what percentage of our diet should be made up of carbohydrates or all the nutrients? Well, the old way of teaching, this is what I taught for the last 27 years, up until just this last year, I would teach my kids that about 55, even 60% maybe of their diet should be made up of carbohydrates. Again, I was looking at that food guide pyramid where the foundation of the pyramid was 6 to 11 servings of grains, which are carbohydrates. Fat, I always told them 25%, and protein 20%. So I've changed that. This year I don't teach those percentages. When they do ask, I just try to have them focus on having a balanced diet. And I just talk about maybe a third of their diet being carbohydrates, certainly the complex kind, maybe a third being fat, the healthy fat, and a third being protein because they're still growing and developing. So I've kind of focused on the balance part of it, and certainly not the high percentage of carbohydrates, and I certainly don't show the food guide pyramid anymore. We're more on the My Plate generation. Now if I'm talking to adults, I've changed the whole way of thinking and flipped them. And fat, the healthy fat, should make up the majority of our diet, 55%. Protein, 25%. And carbs, down to 20%. That's considered a low carb diet. Some people will tell you it should be even lower than that, but 20% is way better than 55 or 60. So I just try to be carb conscious, and anyone struggling with their weight or inflammation or diabetes, that's what I tell them. Focus a little bit more on the fats. Try to train your body to become fat adapted and use fat as a source of energy. So that wraps it up and brings us to the question of the day. Based on what you heard today, which 2 simple carbohydrate foods can you cut way back on or completely eliminate from your diet? Again, Oreos, it's one of my weaknesses. I've almost cut them completely out. If someone puts a bag in front, I'm only going to eat 1 or 2 instead of 10 or 12 like I used to, but I still try not to eat any. Candy, soda, cut back on the Starbucks, please. Gatorade is not always a healthy replacement fluid, and certainly the chips and all those processed foods are not good for us. So if you can cut out or cut back on some of these, you're going to be healthier, I guarantee it. Change your white bread to wheat bread. There's whole grain pastas, there's brown rice instead of white rice, there's whole grain tortillas and taco shells, and maybe a little bit less on the syrup and the jams and jellies on our pancakes. If you need to sweeten your coffee or your cereal, there are some good alternatives to table sugar. Not all artificial sweeteners are good for you, but stevia is a good choice, and monk fruit is another one. Orange juice, I'm not telling you to not drink orange juice anymore, but maybe freshly squeeze it or have a smaller glass than you used to. And milk, we don't need to consume maybe as much as we used to. Again, whole grains, if you're eating bagels or any type of bread, make it whole grain, and maybe not as big a bagel or 2 full ones like I used to eat. Here's a website that I want you to check out, and again, it's a YouTube video actually, but it's called The Secrets of Sugar. It's a documentary about the harmful effects of sugar and really how we've been kind of tricked into thinking that sugar and a high carb diet is a good thing. It's something that I'm really going to focus on in a lot of my YouTube videos, and it's really what I'm trying to convince you of, that we have to shift the paradigm and get rid of the carbs, or at least cut way back. So thank you again. I'm not the 5th ranked health and wellness channel on the internet, probably 155th or 255th, but it doesn't matter. I want to get to number 5, so I'm going to create great content, but I need you to help me out. I need you to subscribe to my channel. I'm hoping you like it. I'm hoping I provide good enough content that resonates with you, so give me a thumbs up. Please share it. Anyone that's having any issues with obesity, diabetes, or just inflammation in general, or overall poor health, please point them towards Tiny Mountain Wellness. If you want to know when I put out new videos, hit that bell notification. I really appreciate you joining me. I also have a website and a blog at tinymountainwellness.com you can check out for more information. Until next time, I'll see you on the next video.